U.S. President Joe Biden pledged this week to take a more active role in diplomacy over Ukraine in an effort to deter Russian leader Vladimir Putin from a feared invasion of Ukraine. But up to 150,000 Russian troops, by some estimates, are massed along Ukraine's borders. U.S. intelligence analysts warn Moscow could be preparing to stage a military intervention early in the new year. But is an all-out war between two countries whose populations are so deeply intertwined really possible? DW's Nick Connolly has been to the town of Milove in eastern Ukraine's border region with Russia to find out how the locals feel.
This muddy track used to be an international crossing from Ukraine to Russia. For Helena and her neighbors with family and friends on both sides, it was a lifeline.
I want to check what kind of wire they've put up. Yes, it's barbed wire. And they've ploughed this strip to catch people who try to cross.
A few signs, some fencing and some barbed wire. It might not look like a particularly well-defended frontier between two countries in conflict, but it's certainly a big change for people in this part of eastern Ukraine, who until a few years ago could drive across the border without as much as showing a passport.
My neighbor has his elderly mother down there on the Russian side. It's only 6 kilometers from here, but now he has to do a huge loop and travel 10 times that to pass through the border post.
When the border fence was first built a few years ago, Helena tells us, relatives would come and stand on both sides to talk over the barbed wire. It's this closeness, these personal ties, that mean that many here aren't ready to believe that armed conflict with Russia is even possible.
We hear all the scary things on the news, but I just can't imagine it affecting us here. There's no animosity between us.
That may be the case, but the tanks and the troops are definitely there, even if they're still some 200 kilometers from Helena's border village, with US defense sources warning invasion could be a reality within months.
We've been expecting a Russian invasion since 2014. They're always flexing their muscles. And I think this is just an attempt to win political concessions.
For now, at least, Ukraine's top commander in the region isn't convinced that war is inevitable. But if armed conflict does break out, he's well aware that US or NATO troops will not come to Ukraine's defense.
We know we have only ourselves to rely on, but weapons deliveries would make a big difference. We need an anti-aircraft shield, and if we have that, any kind of intervention will be much less likely.
In the border town of Milove, there's not much of that shield in evidence, with the Russian and Ukrainian border guards barely a meter apart along the boundary, which runs down the middle of the main street. But even here, where many locals can see Russia from their windows, it's COVID and economic worries rather than Russian tanks that for now are still weighing most heavily on people's minds.
How can we be in danger if the border's right there? We would have seen something already.
I've only seen those Russian tanks on TV. We can't see or hear them here.
No tensions here.
As negotiations between Washington and Moscow to resolve these tensions go into overdrive, the people on the ground in eastern Ukraine seem unwilling to believe that the threat of war is real until they see those Russian tanks with their own eyes.
Let's get more now from Liana Fix. She's a political scientist and a program manager at the Körber Foundation with a focus on Russia and Eastern Europe. Thanks for being with us. Ms. Fix, Russia's troop buildup on Ukraine's border was the subject of a video summit earlier this week between the U.S. and Russian leaders. Has that done anything to relieve tensions?
Well, the summit was an attempt to provide a diplomatic off-ramp to a really critical situation at the moment. So the US president presented Moscow with two alternatives. Either we find a diplomatic solution to the situation right now, or Moscow is going to face severe economic sanctions from the United States and Europe. And this is a strategy to prevent an outbreak of war. It has not yet relieved tensions, but it attempts to deter Russia from taking any further steps.
U.S. President Biden will speak with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky today. Now, his country was once promised NATO membership, something Russia says it will never accept. Help us understand why Moscow sees the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO as such a threat.
It's important to underline that at the moment there have been no steps taken whatsoever, or there's no process for Ukraine to become a NATO member. And the perspective is definitely entirely unrealistic, something Kiev is also knows and is also aware about. So this Russian argument about a possible NATO enlargement is at the moment and will be in the future not a valid argument. It is rather an attempt to, at this moment, after a long period of frustration with diplomatic solutions over Ukraine, to tighten control over Ukraine's territorial integrity and independence. So this, if we continue this line of argumentation, we will see that it relates back to the thinking about a sphere of influence from the Russian side, which is something that Europe and the United States in its immediate neighborhood obviously have difficulties to accept.
Would it not help, though, if NATO were to take that promise of membership for Ukraine in NATO off the table? What do you think are the steps needed now to prevent the Russia-Ukraine conflict from escalating further?
If NATO were to take this pledge, it would mean that the territorial integrity and the independence of Ukraine and Ukraine's choice as an independent country that it can decide its own foreign and security policy is taken away. And basically, it is conceded to Russia that Ukraine belongs to a Russian sphere of influence and would have lost some of its independence, which it already has lost in 2014 after Russia annexed Crimea and invaded in eastern Ukraine at a time when a NATO membership was also not on the table at all. So I think this is something we should be aware that in 2014 the same arguments have been made and have been used by the Russian side. What would be the next steps? The next steps would be definitely to find a diplomatic off-ramp which revives the Minsk process, which brings in the United States into a diplomatic negotiation prospect and to bring everyone back to the table rather than into the trenches.
Ms. Fix, thank you very much. That was Liana Fix from the Körber Foundation.